Okay, this is Frank Patrick Marone Jr. of Civil War Tours, and I'm here at the Sunken Road at Antietam Battlefield, the bloodiest day in American history, September 17th, 1862. Now, the road that we're in now, called the Sunken Road, it was known to the residents around here prior to the battle. It was a dirt farm lane which was used primarily by farmers to bypass Sharpsburg and been worn down over the years by the wagon traffic and the rain and natural erosion. However, on September the 17th, 1862, for around 3 hours, 2,200 Confederates, which were later reinforced by more troops, held off attacks of Union forces that numbered 10,000 troops. Just after noon, this gray line collapsed and fell back several hundred yards to the Piper Farm. However, the Union soldiers were too worn and suffered so many casualties that they were actually unable to pursue the advantage. However, the ghastly scene of the aftermath of the battle here at the Sunken Road was so bad that one observer wrote they were lying in rows like the ties of a railroad, in heaps like covered wood, splintered and shattered fence rails. Words are inadequate to portray the scene. Now, during the early hours of this fight, Colonel John Brown Gordon promised Robert E. Lee, "The men are going to stay here, General, until the sun goes down or victory is won." Around 9:30 in the morning, with the Confederates behind the fence, they held their fire as the Union soldiers came over the hill. Then, as Gordon remembered, my rifles flamed and roared in the Federals' faces like a blinding blaze of lightning. The entire line, with few exceptions, went down in the consuming blast. As Union soldiers under French and Richardson collided with Hill and Anderson and Longstreet's command for over 3 hours, thousands of men blazed away at each other at point-blank range. Eventually, the overwhelming Union forces and the confusion in the Confederate ranks forced the defenders back. When the fighting subsided, 5,500 soldiers lay dead or wounded on the field and in the road. That number included Colonel Gordon himself, who had been hit 5 different times. The only thing that saved his life was that earlier in the battle, during one of his other wounds, a Yankee bullet had hit him in the head and put a hole in his cap, which allowed the blood to flow out of it, so he would not drown in his own blood. The soldiers that fought here would later describe this as the road of death and a ghastly flooring. From that day forward, the road has been known as Bloody Lane at Antietam. Photographers Alexander Gardner and Timothy O'Sullivan would visit here and take photographs, working for the studio of Matthew Brady in New York. And some of these photographs would be the very first time that photographs of Union soldiers dead, laying on the field of battle with their bodies riddled with bullets and bloating, would be taken back, developed, and then shown in New York City. Today, when visiting the Antietam battlefield, this is a must stop. And though it looks very peaceful and beautiful today, back on September the 17th of 1862, this lane that we're walking in right now was filled with dead bodies from one end to the other. This is a must-see stop when visiting the Antietam battlefield, and it's even greater to walk the entire lane as we've done today, and if possible, take a view of it from the tower that sits at the end of the lane as well. There's also several monuments to different regiments that fought in and around this farm lane, and I highly recommend again, walking through this lane and taking a look at the brave soldiers who fought and died here on September the 17th of 1862. We are now at Burnsides Bridge on the Antietam battlefield. At the time of the battle, this bridge that crossed the Antietam Creek, which was built in 1836, was known as the Rohrbach, or the Lower Bridge. It was built in 1836 to connect Rowersville with Sharpsburg, and it was used for traffic until the year of 1966, when a bypass was built to allow this bridge to be restored back to its 1862 appearance. For more than 3 hours on September the 17th, 1862, Confederate General Robert Toombs and fewer than 500 Georgia soldiers manned this imposing position here on the heights against 3 Federal assaults made by General Ambrose Burnside's much larger 9th Corps. Confederate General James Longstreet would write about this action and would say that General Toombs held the bridge and defended it most gallantly, driving back repeated attacks, and only yielded it after the force brought against him became overwhelming and threatened both his flank and his rear. Around 1 p.m., with Union soldiers crossing further downstream and another attack made on the bridge, Toombs and his men were forced into retreating. However, he retreated in a delaying action, and it provided enough time to allow General A.P. Hill's Confederate soldiers, who were marching from Harper's Ferry, to arrive on the battlefield. Around 9:30 in the morning, the first of 3 Federal assaults to take the bridge moved forward. The first attack was repulsed with great slaughter and at regular intervals. Other attempts of the same kind, which were gallantly met and successfully repulsed. After defending the area for over 3 hours, Confederates began to run low on ammunition. When Walker's division was moved north to bolster the Confederate defense in the West Woods, only 5 brigades under General David R. Jones were left to cover Lee's right. Their position was good, it faced open rolling ground. It was difficult to attack across. However, Major General Ambrose Burnside's 9th Corps was intended to demonstrate against the Confederate right when the main attack further north began. McClellan's orders for Burnside to move forward were not written until 9 p.m., and they were not received until 10 a.m. Instead of a single headlong assault against the bridge, Burnside attempted first to flank the Confederates with a movement by Rodman's division. Rodman could not locate a creek crossing until afternoon. By then, 2 uncoordinated attempts to capture the bridge had failed. And today we're here crossing the bridge. I do want to point out that the tree that's directly in front of us to the left of the bridge is actually a witness tree to the Battle of Antietam on September the 17th, 1862. The bridge recently was restored to its original 1862 appearance, and it sits here in a very picturesque and beautiful spot here along the Antietam Creek. In the summertime, you can see canoers going under, and again, everything seems very peaceful and quiet and park-like. But in September the 17th, 1862, this was a bloody spot. And that tree there witnessed it all, and it's still here for us today to enjoy. So you have 2 assaults down, 1 more assault to go around 1 p.m., and we'll talk about that. Across this field there where you see the trees, there's actually a hillside, the heights. And the 3rd and final attack came off the hillside across this open ground with 2 very brave regiments with the same unit designation. Now, as we walk along the path here, you'll see monuments of different regiments that fought here. The 51st Pennsylvania, which made the 1 o'clock attack. The 51st New York, which is behind us. There's some Maryland troops. And then you see this open field here with the trees. And then beyond the trees, you can see where the ground slopes up. And that's where we're going to be heading next to end this tour and video on Burnside's Bridge. I do want to point out behind us where the stone wall is, there are several photographs that were taken that showed the Some of the dead were buried right along this stone wall with wooden headstone right after the Battle of Antietam in 1862. And so now we will be on the heights and looking down the hill at the bridge there you can see in the distance. And around 1 p.m., the 51st Pennsylvania and 51st New York finally charged across this bridge for the third and final attack for 4 hours. About 500 Confederates under Brigadier General Robert Toombs held off Burnsides' corps, which suffered about 120 casualties. Well, once Major General Burnsides' 9th Corps captured the bridge, today known as Burnsides Bridge, his men took nearly 2 hours to cross it, and then they formed up for an attack against the final Confederate line. If you come to Antietam, or as some people call it, Sharpsburg Battlefield, one of the must-do stops is Burnside Bridge. You'll want to walk across the bridge. You'll want to walk up onto the heights. You'll want to walk along this mostly calm creek that you see here today. You can see someone's hung a rope there where they can swing out into the lake. Like I said, people do swim in here. People do ride canoes in here and do, recreation. But on September the 17th, 1862, this blood was all over the ground, all over the bridge, and going down through the water here of Antietam Creek. So finally, at 3 p.m., a mile-wide battle line of Union soldiers swept across the rolling terrain. 2,500 Confederates with artillery waited them on the high ridge south of the town of Sharpsburg. The fighting was so intense as Burnside's men neared the road to Boutler's Ford that the 9th New York Infantry, Hawkins Zouaves, suffered 63% casualties on the outskirts of Sharpsburg. Just then, exhausted after marching 17 miles from Harper's Ferry, A.P. Hill's Confederate Light Division slammed into the Union left flank and drove the Federals back. The brand new 16th Connecticut Infantry, barely 2 weeks old, bore the brunt of Hill's attack, and some of them had not learned how to even load their muskets until the day before. Divisions of the 5th Corps remained in reserve and were not moved forward to support Burnside. The timely arrival of Hill and the failure of General George McClellan to support Burnside's final assault ultimately saved General Robert E. Lee and his Army of Northern Virginia. Antietam is the bloodiest day in American history. Over 23,000 soldiers were either killed, wounded, or missing after just 12 hours of fighting on September the 17th, 1862. This battle of Antietam also ended the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia's first invasion into the North, and it led Abraham Lincoln to issue the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. Though considered a Union victory only because Confederates retreated and the Union Army had control of the ground, this battle, on paper, is considered a draw. President Abraham Lincoln was counting on McClellan to bring him a victory that he needed to keep the Republican control of the Congress and issue a preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. He would issue that Emancipation Proclamation anyway, which would give troops in the North another reason to fight the remaining 2.5 years of the American Civil War. I want to thank you for coming here on this tour with me. And my name is historian Frank Patrick Marone Jr., and we're here in historic Sharpsburg, Maryland, at the Antietam Battlefield.